We would like to start the panel discussion, so I'd like to bring on Gorm, as well as Steve and Magnus. Are you here? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Is this working? Yeah. Like, you can just pass it. You just pass it. So I think we have some interesting questions. One of the really cool questions that came to us is about the current elections and big data, and of course we know we'll be talking about Cambridge Analytica and so on and so forth. And this specific, let me just find this question here. Sorry about that. It's not my heartbeat. I think since we won't be needing the screen anymore, so let me just take everything out of here so I can just read the questions much better. So one of the questions is it's about the current political situation, because there are a lot of people who, I see even in the audience, who are foreigners like myself, and including myself. I'm voting for the first time. I'm supposed to be voting. I'm not a person who believes in politics. I come from Sri Lanka, so everyone is corrupt there, and I come from a political family, so I know how the game goes, right? You just vote for that particular party, you know, who's going to give you the contract to build the road, though you have no idea about anything about road construction or building bridges, but you know you're going to get that contract and a couple of millions in your bank. So the question was something similar to Cambridge Analytica, because this person asks that as a new citizen to Norway, and since politics and elections are a pretty big thing here, and people still trust their politicians, I believe. That's not my opinion. And how a lot of people struggle to understand which politicians actually represents their individual interests, because they're new to Norway, and they would rather have some sort of messaging, at least very clear messaging to show, okay, these are the interests which are basically, you know, what we stand for. So in a situation like that, do you think big data could be used in a justifiable way to understand individual people through their profiles or so on and so forth, and deliver a more positive message?
Yeah, I think that I've been longing for the system for a while, not just with politics, but with taxes. Where does our money go? I want to know exactly from the 10 kroner that I've spent on my taxes, which part of the road was built. I want to be able to look at that road, look at that brick, and say that was my contribution. I would love to see that, and you know, blockchain is another solution there, as well as big data to make that happen. There's a lot of solutions there that I'd like to see in the future. More trains, more teachers, you know, more public, more of this. But is the question really about more, or is it about better systems? So I saw an advertisement, you know, more cars, more public transport, vote for me. I think that's a little bit degrading. I'd like to see a better, you know, reason, better system. At least they can say we've created a better system that will create better transport. So that's kind of my take on it. I'd like to see much more data-driven results there.
One comment on that. I was one that watched this Netflix special called The Big Hack. And if you haven't watched it, I encourage you to see it, because it was both extremely frightening, although we both know pieces of it, but the degree to which they can predict our behavior for whatever purposes they can profit from is frightening. So I look forward to the day when we can use the data points that are gathered to benefit us as individuals, as a society, rather than for the profit of a few technological companies.
I would agree on that the data in Norway kind of belongs to people living here. And well, for the traceability, I think that's kind of a lack of trust, because I would imagine that people working in public services are good by nature. That's why they work there. And I agree on kind of the transparency. I think transparency is important, and also ethics around this area. To trace my particular funds going in, I think shows a lack of trust. So I think trust is important in this, unless you want to run your public services yourself. But I agree that we have some work to do in traceability of public funds.
Being from California originally, and one of the reasons I'm not living there is because of the current political system. I've been there for 30 years. Is Norway, in my opinion, as someone who's been here for 20 years, does have a very good data protection kind of law. I do trust the public agencies, and one of the things that surprised me, having just paid my taxes, is that if you call Cottingham or you talk to any of these big agencies that are governmental, I've never received a higher level of support or responsiveness from a large governmental agency as I have in Norway. So I kind of believe that Norway, I trust the data that Norway has on me, particularly when it comes to healthcare information, which is my background. I used to be a hospital director in San Francisco. But the big hack is what's scary, because that's where you started off your presentation, you and your partner. I think the real question is, how do we turn that around? You know, how do we take that power back? And I don't know the answer to it.
Actually, that's one of the next questions that I was going to head to, is that how do we turn this around? How do we watch the people who are watching us? And how do we know if a government agency or if Google or any other organization or is currently tracking and taking information about us? How could we use the same technology to reverse that?
I can talk without a mic, but on that same subject, because I was shocked by this big hack thing with Cambridge Analytica, is that this one gentleman spent, I don't know how many years trying to get his data from the UK, where Cambridge Analytica is technically and legally based. And I didn't see maybe the entire program, but I didn't see him get his data back. He spent years and years and years trying to get the data points that they gathered on him. And I don't know if you know if he ever got that information from Cambridge Analytica. My guess is probably not.
And I would like to comment on that as well. I worked several years with analytics before starting in the government for large Norwegian companies. And the basic ways of doing churns analytics and so forth, even for the ideal organizations like Red Cross, are just the same way as Cambridge Analytics uses AI. The question becomes when they use other means of persuasion and how they use the results. So this is like using a saw. I use a saw for other things than cutting somebody's head off. These are kind of basic tools which has been there for a long time. So to be scared of the technology is not really helping the discussion. So what do they know about me? Okay, what do Google know about me? What does Facebook know about me? What does my telecom provider know about me? I mean, that's kind of the wrong line of question to my mind. as I've been working for this around a decade with big data and analytics, to me, kind of that's the wrong questions. So how do we ensure that we can trust people that has this information? That's more interesting. And we share information with our telecom providers and others. And now we have like 4G, where we want to give all the data to technical people and so forth. There are some really big questions around that. And to be scared of flying and to be scared of kind of this using tools, I mean, that's, to me, that's really, that's dangerous. That's like covering up and hiding. So I think we need to raise the level of this discussion. I think really.
I guess the million-dollar question is, how do we change the system? And I have no idea how to do that. I suppose more proactive and ethical countries such as Norway can be a beacon or some sort of a guiding light to other countries. I'm sure the Nordics in general probably have a pretty high rate of data protection beyond even GDPR and what's required with GDPR under ISO 27001 data security. But I mean, the blockchain idea sounds like a cool approach. I mean, if it's possible to segment parts of your computer as a quasi-server. But then I asked the question, if you mentioned that these blockchain centers use tremendous amounts of electricity to develop that code in 10 minutes. Will our personal computers have the computing power to do the same in the same amount of time? It's something I was thinking about.
Yeah, there's a lack of technology there, you're right. But everyone has access to a server. Our computers are getting more and more powerful every year, and we all should have the right to manage and organize our data. We should all be self-managing citizens in the future, and that's what companies are really tending towards nowadays. There have been objective key results. It's a new form of management in companies that promotes self-organizing employees, where you have your own metrics. You don't necessarily have a direct boss to measure up against those metrics. You create your metrics with your company. So in that way, you're not actually aligned with your boss, you're aligned with your own metrics. So we're promoting a self-organizing society where we ask the question, what motivates you to get out of bed? What is it that you want to do with your life? That's what companies should be asking you right now, in order to make you into the person you want to be. And I think that's what this whole discussion is about. It's about being self-organized, self-managing your own data, understanding that, and a broker not to see the transactions. It's a way for the algorithm to do the transactions for you. You don't need any superior to see above that. That's what I think is so great about this system. That's why the creator of the internet proposed this solution himself.
I think one of the interesting questions that we could add to that is basically, could we replace politicians altogether with technology? Where we have a gatekeeper, like a politician who has no clue about building bridges, for example, and has to make a decision and makes a decision to give the contract to X contractor, or so on and so forth. Instead, wouldn't this technology give us the ability to give directly to people? Let's say, okay, if it's to build a bridge, the people who are concerned regarding the bridge, who are engineers, or people who are affected by that bridge being built within that local area, and then the businesses and so on and so forth. What can we directly give them the responsibility to make the decision of building the bridge, for example, and how big the bridge should be, and the dimensions, and the whatnot, the regulations over it, and all the power and everything around this. Okay, I don't know much about bridges. It's just an example that I took up. So just completely forego the whole politicians and making all these policies and regulations and so on, because they are from another dimension or from another age, and give it directly to the people who are actively being affected by these decisions. If it's migration, okay, should we build a wall between whatever Sweden and Norway? Okay, and who's to make a decision about financing it? Should there actually be a wall, and what should the wall be like if there should be a wall? And those decisions to be made directly by the people who are affected by this, instead of just some person who's sitting somewhere who has no clue, just is saying that just to sort of make his constituents happy and just to sound really catchy at that specific moment in time. So could technology bring us to this age where we are self-governing and being monitored by blockchain or so on and so forth, so that we know the person who's voting is being authenticated in so many different levels, and then so there is no hacking, and even if there's hacking, it's very easily tracked. And then so this is a really interesting question that popped up. So thank you for who asked that question.
I think of two things. I mean, I think that would be a wonderful idea, to give the power back to the people, so to speak, coming from UC Berkeley. But the cost implications in terms of the savings from minimizing the number of politicians and having the people who are directly paying, in essence, through their taxes for these road or bridge projects would be a wonderful thing. But when I kind of giggled to myself when you mentioned, artificial intelligence guiding political decisions. The first thing came to mind was the comment that you made earlier about someone just switching chips in the person's head. And how would we protect against that occurring, I never thought of that before, by the way. Basically, you could implant an AI chip in your head to do basically whatever you want. It's a very good point.
That's Elon Musk. That's what he wants to do to all of us, so we know what he's doing right now. So.
Yeah, I think I'm not so scared of the AI I've met, because I don't know how many here are programmers. But to me, AI, as I've seen it, it's like getting new borders for if-then-else statements. It's very, very simple stuff. So it works fine on models like chess. Now, I've actually written some models myself and done some neural nets. The next kind of evolution of this thing is a bit better, but it's not like intelligence. I can understand it. So when we talk about AI, let's be clear, it's very, very basic stuff. It's run by humans. So when talking about morale and that kind of thing, the decisions are made by humans and not computers. And when I have delivered AI to insurance companies and that kind of thing, it's always persons that make decisions. So let's not fool ourselves into some kind of herd or some kind of future idea. This is very, very simple stuff. So it's if-then-else statements that you can create in your heads with new borders. So let's not be too scared about that.
Again, going back to medicine and the example that you showed briefly on a high rate of detection of cancer. I'd be interested in learning more about that personally. But I think we've all heard that IBM has this supercomputer. I forget what it's called, but Watson. And Watson has been proven, just as an example of the positive use of artificial intelligence in machine learning. Okay, but it's been proven, at least from what I've seen and read, to have a very high rate of accuracy in excess of what many doctors can when it comes to particularly oncology and radiation oncology and cancer treatment.
Yes, and I've worked with Watson in Norway because I worked on health research, and I can assure you it's simple if-then-else statements that you find that might fit your purpose. So it's no revolution in this. It's tricks.
But does it work?
In Norway it didn't, because they were unable to build enough historical data. So what they wanted to do was to treat cancer in children better by using information to have some kind of signal that you should look for sufficient things. And they failed on very basic things because they are, these algorithms are standard algorithms. So what they really needed was to the speech to text, understanding doctors' language, which is different in Norway, etc. So they were unsuccessful because of standard data management things. So we think of this as magical things, but it's if-then-else statements based on what you typically would call feature extraction. Look at a lot of data that looks unstructured, get some information, structure it into your model, make some decisions. It's very, very basic stuff. It has nothing to do with moral. So to me, this is very basic stuff. And of course, when these kind of algorithms makes decisions, the real important thing here is the data and the data quality. And I totally support controlling your own data and so forth. But working from health, it's more important for me personally. So I worked with health research for a couple of years, that they actually use the information. So I have big problems with I'm going to die in the hospital because they don't use the information, because they are really, really scared, because they don't really know what they're doing. Because all these if-then-else statements looks very, very scary, but it's very basic stuff, to my mind.
And one of the other questions is the decentralized internet world handling online crimes? How will it be handling online crimes, scams, frauds, since the government won't be able to control anything?
Well, I thought about another app the other day, right? We all see some shady crime. I don't know if anyone has walked by the Prince's, the King's Garden, but I see some criminal activities happening there almost every day. And you know, it could be called micro-reporting. You could have an app and just micro-report small crime, or you know, you see some violence, you can report it on an app. What if everyone helps us gather information on crime, and now we're kind of looking into a dystopian future, perhaps with you know, the secret police happening, but on the modern scale. But at the same time, if people do it with good intention, you could really solve a lot of crime. And you could even verify if it's true by seeing if there's multiple evidence reportings of the same thing. And then you come up with new systems with big data that could make the whole process of policing much, much more efficient and better. So I look forward to seeing that happen as well by hopefully a very ethical company.
I just wonder about that. How would you ensure that it would respect data privacy in data gathering for the criminals in a balanced legal and law system with such multitudes gathering of data?
Well, right now I wouldn't trust the judge on everything. The judge has to make biased decisions every day, and sometimes those decisions are, you know, sometimes the judge has a bad lunch and maybe makes a bad decision, and I mean, why not? We're all human, right? But the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to be more data-driven, so we can see through the history of someone, get some analytics on them, and make more informed decisions as humans. And then we'll find out more and more about human behavior, and hopefully that will lead us to understanding some ways of not criminalizing humans, but preventing crimes, you know, preventative measures. So with big data, we could psychologically help us understand how we can survive and coexist better.
Going back to your presentation, which I thought was very interesting, and I don't understand blockchain. I certainly have never used it, but to see the diagram and having the code, and you mentioned that it can take 10 minutes for a qualified hacker to hack one cube. I think part of the answer, maybe, sir, to your question, is that if you had billions of points or cubes, it would be fairly difficult, I would think, or more difficult than today, for someone to hack into the data and use it in a malicious manner. But that's just based on what I saw.
That's exactly right. Right now there's one entry point to hack. You hack the central server, you get all the data. 3 billion users of Yahoo, for example, which happened. With the decentralized systems, many entry points. Every single person has an entry point. That's one of the advantages. It's just a limitation of how we do it right now.
Another question that popped up is that through the taxation of these large corporates who are like the Googles and the Facebooks and so on, how could this affect their data policy by taxing? For example, you mentioned that Amazon doesn't get taxed on gathering data through sources. So let's say theoretically we are able to have a tax on that. How could this, do you think, could affect their data policy, or do you think this could affect their data policy?
Well, just as there's no value put on data right now, you get someone's email and there's no monetary value attached to it, so that could be a huge thing to have a look at. I'm not sure exactly how you implement that, but I think the system is flawed. So maybe it's just to change the centralized system to decentralized one would solve a lot of issues instead of trying to fix the centralized issue.
Going on and adding to that point, and I think you could probably do so better, sir, because you work in the public sector, is that if we are able to get some taxes from these companies, whereas we currently don't some of that money could be allocated for new ways of data protection, including the methodology that you briefly described. And I'm sure there's others that your organization has in mind that maybe there's not funding for it that could be funded by such taxes.
I think it's a really good question, and I think even for the companies, because I used to work in consulting, information and data is not looked at as a strategic asset at all. So there's a lot of maturity that needs to be done, and there's going to be some years in front of us that we haven't. Yeah, this is new ground for everybody, and it's a really good question. I don't have an answer, but I really wish that I did, because to value information and the data, and what data has no value and what's the value of data. I mean, that's really difficult, isn't it? So, because going back to the health example, I can walk into a venue where people are being operated on without being stopped. But I can't know the weight of my liver because it's secret. So it's kind of the real world has no protection of this value at all. We have no history of handling information, the inherent value of information. And that's going to take, a generation. So I think it's a really good question, and I wish I share some light on it, but it's going to take a long time, to be honest.
I think would you like to? One of the, well, thank you very much for who asked that question. The person says it's anonymous, so, anonymous, thank you very much. But that's a very interesting question, and one of the, doing a bit of research before these specific meetup, because data is at the top of everyone's head, and especially data protection. So what we're seeing what we're seeing right now is people leaning more and more towards decentralized systems, because specifically thanks to people like Donald Trump, where we're seeing too much power accumulated in one person who doesn't know what he's doing. And but this is just one example. If you look at every politician, it's literally like that. Always no exception. Okay, let's face it. So why should we give this much power? Like Russell Brand said when Malcolm X was being walked out of prison, and he just waved his hand, and this entire mob of African American people just calmed down. And why do we give too much power into the hands of just a few people, and specifically people who do not have good intentions and definitely have no idea what they're doing? So decentralized systems, or further developing decentralized system, not just in currency, as of in blockchain, but in every aspect of our life, as you mentioned, in crime detection, in self-governance, and so on and so forth, because there are a committed part of people, a committed part of society who are actually sort of committed to solving environmental issues, and that's what we are seeing. People are becoming more and more aware about politics and environmental issues and sustainability and so on and so forth, and then this movement is growing. If you look at, including Media Monday, when we had an event around sustainability, we had about 100,000 people who were interested in that specific event. So we're seeing that, I mean, this was not even within our scope of interest. We just did it just to try it out. So people are more aware of what's happening, because we're in such a huge mess right now, globally. Climate to everything. So I think decentralized system is, kind of looks like the way that we need to head. So, what I mean, what as a last note, what would be your last message or your last input into this decentralized system, and what are your personal thoughts that you would like to leave us with before we end this session?
Personally, I would think decentralized system is defer and avoiding the problem, because the value, you get the value when you link data across. So what you're doing is you pretend it's not there, or that kind of thing. So it's not really handling the real issues to me. And for when I watched Netflix about Cambridge Analytics, it's very, very basic stuff. I could have helped them much better. Those kind of newbies there. So they just had a bad plan, and they executed on that. So data is a weapon in this sense, and to kind of pretend it's not. I mean, I don't believe in that at all. So to me, decentralization is kind of pretending this doesn't exist.
I don't really have an answer to the question, except that I have learned tonight that data does have a value, and it needs to be valued by the government, by individuals, by monitoring agencies, and once that value is assigned, hopefully it can be used for better use than it currently is.
Yeah, I think the issue with new ideologies is that they're very hard to place, because we're not used to them. For example, maybe you've been on a platform, maybe you use an app every day, and maybe there's a feature you really, really want. Maybe, like on Facebook, you've always wanted to pay your friend something, but Facebook never knew that, and it's going to take Facebook a long time to understand from the data that you want this payment system. What if you could just vote? What if you had a blockchain, you could just vote, and it would create a feature for that? Similarly, it's the same idea with the bridge. You really need to cross this river every day to get to work. We have to take a bus to go all the way around it, but the government does not have the data of the transport. Why can't you just make this self-managing decision yourself? You can make so many more contributions to society than you can possibly imagine right now, and we waste so much of our brain power not providing that to the government instantly, every day, day in, day out, and it scares me. Really, I see people working in various stores, for example, gathering customer information, and what their purpose is to accept payment, and that's it. Where they gather so much information about the customer, and they could be utilizing so much more of their knowledge to help out. I think the people that tap into this knowledge are going to be the ones that are going to win out in the next few years. So I think it's an ideology that's hard to see the advantages of in the beginning, but it will become more and more clear. Maybe there's different ways of doing decentralization that make more sense as well. As he pointed out, that this might not be the best solution, but I think this ideology is the way to go forward.
Thank you very much, Magnus, and thank you very much, Gorm, and as well as Steve. It's been a very, very insightful evening.